Right, let's continue on with the references or the supposed references for Mecca prior to the 7th century. Remember, we've said we're only interested in the 7th century. We're not interested in the 9th and 10th century. We're not interested in what the traditions say about Mecca or any of the other documents that Muslims keep pulling forward and keep referring to. I want to see what happened in the 7th century. From what we have seen, Mecca did not exist at all in the 7th century. We don't have any references until 741. That's the mid-8th century. And if that is the Mecca we're talking about, we don't even know that yet. But let's look at a second claim. The claim by Muslims and others as well, in fact, as we're going to find by many Orientalists and many Westerners, that Macoraba, M-A-C, either O-R-A-B-A or M-A-K-O-R-A-B-A, either way you write it, it's the same word. Who was the one that referred to that? Well, to understand that, we need to go right back to the 2nd century, to about 141 to 147, to the Greek writer and geographer named Claudius Ptolemy. Ptolemy lived in Alexandria, there in what is today Egypt, and he wrote about and put a map up of all the cities or towns or hamlets in Western Arabia, in Southern Arabia, and what he thought was Central Arabia. And in fact, here's the map right here. This is the map that we're talking about. I'll put it up on the screen so you can all see it. And it's this map I want to refer to now, because this map goes into quite a bit into where he thought it was. Now, according to him, Macoraba was right here, where that circle is I have right there in red. There's the Macoraba. And he put degrees. He was very good with putting degrees of where this place was. And so he put it as, and the degrees he put it was from 73 degrees by 20 by 22 degrees. So he's very accurate in where he wanted to place these different towns and cities and hamlets. If you look at the map, you can see there's a problem right away. Look above it to Yathrib. I'm going to circle Yathrib there, which is Yathrib. That's now the city of Medina. And you can see immediately that Macoraba on his map is to the east, the southeast. Well, that's not the case. Let's look at a modern map. Look at this modern map of Arabia, and you will see that Mecca is to the southwest of Yathrib, what is today Medina. So already you can see there's a problem with location. Nonetheless, maybe he just wasn't a good map maker. Maybe he didn't really know where it was to begin with. But there's another problem, and a second problem, and this is Ian D. Morris really goes into this in detail. He has a whole 10 pages that he has written this out in a brilliant article on this subject, and I'm going to be using some of his material. And then I'm going to do a second video where I'm going to look at Gibson's reference to this and what the Gibson says concerning the place of Macoraba. But Ian D. Morris doesn't really talk so much about the place. He talks more about the etymology, the word itself. Is Macoraba, is that word, is that Mecca? Is it the right etymology? And what he does, he traces a great, I love what he does. He goes and he traces historically where this idea of Mecca and Macoraba come into play and where it became popular. And he goes right back to the 17th century because it's fascinating. It's not the Muslims that have said that Mecca and Macoraba are the same. They haven't really got into this discussion until this century or just the last century. It's been mostly Europeans who have claimed that Macoraba, that Ptolemy's Macoraba is Mecca. And he refers to Samuel Bochart, who is French, Bochart or Bochart, however you pronounce it, in 1651. So we're talking about 350 years ago. 350 years ago was the first reference to this idea that Macoraba, the Ptolemy's Macoraba, was Mecca, had to be Mecca. In France, he was the first to suggest that. Within the next century, by 1739, another man named Johann Heinrich Zedler was the one that wrote about it in his encyclopedia, and because in his encyclopedia in German, and that then created and suggested, therefore, that this was sacrosanct. But really what made it strong was another one, the fellow that came along in the 18th century, 1799, right, the end of the 18th century, who wrote in his name was Konrad Mannert. Konrad Mannert, 1799, referred to the name Macoraba and tried to etymologically look and unpack that this meant mihrab. It was close to the word mihrab, which is a temple, or like the mihrab that we use today, and that mihrabs that you see, the niche in the wall where the Qibla wall was. So he was the one that introduced that in 1799. And then in the 1800s, in 1846, midway through, a man named Albert Forbiger, a German scholar, wrote it and said and referred to it in his encyclopedia, which then became the canon for academia. So from the mid-1800s on, every academic has assumed that Mecca and Macoraba are the same place. It was Edward Glasser in 1890 who gave a reason for it, and he said that this word, this mihrab, was actually a word that came from southern Arabia, and that was that word that means temple. So therefore it was a pre-Islamic temple. It was a pre-Islamic temple. So that today, in most encyclopedias, they would say that Macoraba and Mecca are the same place, and that this would be the earliest reference. And that's why Muslims are quoting Europeans. They're quoting us. They're quoting Western scholars. All the way back from 1651. For 350 years, Europeans have assumed that Macoraba and Mecca are the same place. So what does Ian D. Morris do with this? Ian Morris goes and he says, hold on a minute. And he goes back to Patricia Corona. Dr. Patricia Corona, who is a good friend of, well, not a good friend, is a friend. I knew her. I've been in her office. She helped me put together my first debate in 1995 at Cambridge University when she was a professor there. And she is the one that wrote Meccan Trade and the Rise of Islam, which really blew this idea of Mecca right out of the water and destroyed Montgomery Watt's trade route theory. Just completely destroyed his trade route theory. I'll be doing a video about that to explain that to you. But Patricia Corona said this, and I'm going to quote her. In her book on 1987, she says, the plain truth is that the name of Macoraba has nothing to do with that of Mecca, and that the location indicated by Ptolemy for Macoraba in no way dictates identification of the two. So it's very clear that Patricia Corona in 1987, so we're talking about the 20th century, would not go with that. And neither does Ian D. Morris. Ian D. Morris would say there has been too much speculation. In fact, let me just quote you what he says. It is telling that after 350 years of experimentation, we have a handful of incompatible etymologies, none of which quite fits. It is also telling that 5 very different interpretations have resorted to languages that flourished outside ancient Mecca to describe or to find commonalities between Macoraba and Mecca. Aramaic, and he points to Sprenger, who brought that forward. The Hebrew language by Bochart, who is the first to introduce this idea, Dozy, who comes after him, and Old South Arabian from Glasser, and the first Muslim to really get into this discussion, Ali. Why then is there still a consensus that Macoraba is Mecca? Unless I'm mistaken, Morrison continues, the idea was first noted in the 17th century, that's 1651 by Bochart. In the 18th century, it found its way into encyclopedias, and that would have been with the Johann Heinrich Zedler. And then in the 19th, it was fairly common knowledge among Orientalists. Konrad Mannert helped to popularize the idea, but it was probably Albert Forbiger entry in Pauli's Encyclopedia that assured its place in the canon of Orientalist thought. So he shows that the sequence that has gone through in the last 350 years. And then he concludes and he says, those who have benefited from Crohn's Meccan trade and other studies will know that the medieval stories about Arabia before Islam have been weathered by literary forces for so long with such intensity that even the matter-of-factest details are brought into question. Characters are swapped in and out. Details are spun off to write law and exegesis, Stories are relocated to new environments. This activity is most energetic where the storytellers had the most interest in the development of stuff like the Quran, Muhammad, and of course the history of Mecca. It is not impossible that Mecca is Macoraba, he says. But right now, given the state of the field, there is no rigorous way to bridge the two names. It is easier to conclude that they are different places. Patricia Corona seems to be vindicated, and hopefully this article will be a second small step towards overturning the consensus. So, is this the place that Muslims claim existed? What about, where am I going to go with this? Well, let me just back up a few centuries. In fact, let's just go and see what the Quran says. See, what the Quran says and what the traditions say is traditions from over here, and the Quran from here, the 8th century, traditions from later, is that Abraham lived in Mecca. That's in chapter 21, ayah 51 to 71. So Abraham, living in the 19th century, would have to live in Mecca. That's pretty old. That's quite a long time ago, folks. We're talking about almost 4,000 years ago. So if Mecca or Macoraba is Mecca, then Macoraba would have to have existed back into the 1900 BC. Why is it that Ptolemy only has one reference to a city that's that old, that's that important? Oh, you can go even beyond that, according to the traditions. Adam and Eve, when they were thrown out of the Garden of Eden in chapter 7, verse 24 of the Quran, when they were thrown down to Mecca, which would make Mecca the oldest city in the history of mankind, older than any other city. Then why does Ptolemy just give a small reference to it, just one reference on one map? On one map, that's it, just one little map, reference on one map, doesn't say anything about it. Just puts there in the wrong place. True, to be true, it is in the wrong place. If this was the oldest city in the history of mankind, if it's the city where Abraham rebuilt the Kaaba, we're going to talk about the Kaabas later in another video, along with Ishmael, his son, then why in the world has no one noticed it? And why did Ptolemy just slap it in the map in the wrong place and didn't say anything about it? And why is it it's taken 350 years of European scholar after European scholar after European scholar to try to etymologically try to impose the idea of mihrab onto the word Macoraba when the root word is not the same? Mecca and Macoraba are not the same word in Arabic. Folks, can you see? There is a desire to find Mecca. There is a desire by Europeans to underline the importance of Mecca. And the Europeans have tried to do so for 350 years. What I want to ask Muslims is, do you agree with the Europeans? Do you agree with good old Bochart and Zedler and Mannert and Forbiger and Glasser? Do you agree with them? Did they get the right word? Mihrab from Southern Arabia. Is that the Mecca you're looking for? Folks, I'm not going to tell you my conclusions. You're going to be surprised by my conclusions. I really do have an interest in what these Europeans have been saying. But I'm not going to say that yet, not for this video. You're going to have to wait when I unpack what Gibson is saying. And once I give you what Dan Gibson is saying, because he does look at the place itself, and he shows you that there's a problem with this map to begin with, because when Ptolemy made this map, he didn't look at the geography of where the rivers are. That's why he wasn't aware that there was nothing in this central area. And that's why he then reimposes the map, looking and taking the rivers as his guideposts. Wait till you see what Gibson comes up with. Hold on. That's for the next video. We'll still unpack it, and then I will give you my conclusions. But it looks like Ian D. Morrison is not at all convinced that this is Mecca. He has not really taken a position against it per se. He's just saying it's the wrong place, it's the wrong etymology, you're starting from the wrong premise, and you're imposing upon your views, you Europeans, using all these other languages to try to impose the meaning onto this word. but you still haven't found Mecca. Is he right? Is he wrong? Hold on. Come back. We'll pick this up again in the next video to see whether indeed Mecca can be found prior to the 7th century. God bless you. This is Jay. Over and out.